So let's see some hands. Anybody want to offer a thought over here? Well, this gentleman there was very quick. Take the microphone to the chap in the check shirt there. So as quick and concise as you can be, and we'll take in as many as we can. Yeah.
Just recently been in the region, and two questions that came up were, is Bashar al-Assad a principal actor, or is he more in the puppet area of sphere of his fellow regime, clan / establishment, and so on?
Yes.
And the other aspect is, what are the potential outcomes in the neighboring countries, namely Lebanon and the Golan and the border with Israel?
Thank you. Definitely want to hear lots on that last point. Who else has got a hand up? Okay, gentleman there. Or in fact, we'll take it back there to the lady there with her hand up. Keep your hand up, actually, it will help.
Thank you. A number of you have said that it's really important to try and get a political solution. I think most of you have kind of hinted at that. There are other ways, apart from military options, to increase pressure on Assad. For example, Russia's support, both in terms of arms and diplomatically, is extremely important to Assad. Is there more that the international community can do to put pressure on Russia to take away their support for Assad, which would, I believe, leave Assad in a much more threatened position and might put him around the table?
Thank you. Very good, clear question. Let's hear who we've got. Have we got the microphone up there? Yeah, we're going to. And have you got someone next to you who wants to ask something? No. So this will be our third and last in this round. Yeah.
On the topic of foreign intervention, I was wondering if, the foreign intervention will most likely be led by the United States. I was wondering whether this will be in the interests of the Syrian people and the revolutionaries, or the opposition, or will it be in the interest of AIPAC, which is so powerful, and Israel, a great ally of the US and the West?
All right. We'll have noted that one. Weary only because it's enough to debate Syria without getting drawn into that whole one, to which Intelligence² has devoted much time in the past. Make your question as brief as you can, yeah.
Jonathan, this question is really for you. How come there are 5 members on the panel representing or standing for military action and only 1 representing the other point of view? I mean, one of the reasons I came here is to listen to a different point of view to what is being communicated on a daily basis in the media and television and the press. And I really didn't get it.
How did you find that there are 5 who represent military action? Did I say I wanted military action?
No,
but Roger, I don't think you heard what we said.
But 5 of you are promoting the change of the regime,
well, of course,
by hook or by crook. You want a change of the regime. You're not
by the will of the Syrian people, I think, rather than by hook.
I understand the point you're making. I didn't choose the speakers myself, but I think we've had a pretty good, spirited and informative selection of views. You're right, you can't get a perfectly geometrically balanced panel. I don't know who was invited and who couldn't come. I don't know the full story of that, but your point has been noted, and I think the panel will probably reflect that in their answers. Let's go straight to Malik on this question of Bashar Assad. Is he the main player here, or is he a puppet of some of his the regime figures around him?
Can I just say that I'm kind of bored of this question, because this question has been asked since day one. But it's interesting, nevertheless. And I think that the
boring
answer is,
yet interesting.
It's boring.
The ideal question.
It has been used as an excuse not to do anything.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. But it's interesting in the sense that if you offer, if you get the right answer, you explain a lot of things. Syria has been described as a dictatorship without a dictator. I think that's quite accurate. Hafez al-Assad still governs Syria from his grave. The system that he put into place, that he created, still governs Syria today, and Bashar is simply the figurehead for this system. The regime represents the collective will of the Alawites and also certain religious minorities in the country. And Nadim said something very interesting, but he didn't carry on. He said Bashar represents a group. It's true. He represents his own group, the Alawites. Bashar al-Assad isn't the president of Syria. He's essentially a glorified warlord. And if we look at Bashar al-Assad in that perspective, perhaps we can start looking at it's a more accurate way at looking at the situation.
Thank you. The question for you, Roger Cohen, if the US was to lead some kind of outside intervention, would it be serving the interests of the Syrian people, or would it be serving its own interests, or even those shadowy dark forces that were invoked to maybe behind the scenes?
Well, I think Israel's view, and so no doubt AIPAC's view right now of what's happening in Syria is better the devil you know. Rather disappointingly, I think, throughout the Arab Spring, Israel has felt more comfortable with its security intelligence agency to security intelligence agency relationships than it is with an opening up that raises all kinds of questions. And I think Bashar al-Assad falls into that category. I certainly don't think Israel is pushing. Anyway, Israel's so busy pushing for a military intervention in Iran, it doesn't have much energy left over for Syria. But I certainly don't think it's pushing in that direction. I think Israel would rather that the current regime survives.
So put Israel to one side. The United States, would it be doing it for the best interests of the Syrian people, or should people be worried by the precedents of Iraq and Afghanistan that actually, if there is military action, it will end up making a bad situation much worse?
The United States is not some great, altruistic power it pursues its interests, but it also, I believe, in general, and I'm a naturalized American, so maybe I'm overkind to my country, but I do believe that America tries where it can to promote its values, which are values of freedom and openness and democracy and accountability and all the rest. And I think Obama broadly has done that during the Arab Spring. And I think, in my view, I was interested by your question, sir, because I was going through my mind and trying to think, how one mounts a defense of the Assad regime, how one argues that the continuation of this 42-year-long dictatorship is actually, overall, given the difficulties within Syrian society, overall, that's probably the best thing for 23 million Syrians for this to carry on. I don't think it is. I don't think the United States at this point thinks it is, and I think that would be the main driving force in whatever the United States does to try to help the opposition.
Let me just come back to the question, since we can correct our balance. Do you have a microphone there? So you may have to bellow. We'll pass it back to you. I mean, you can be our honorary seventh panelist just for this bit. Was Roger Cohen characterising your position accurately in that you're saying because the other options are so unappealing, you would rather we stay with the Assad regime in place? Is that fair to your position?
I wasn't defending really the Assad regime.
But is it your view that it's better for the regime to stay put than any of these alternatives?
I'm not sure about the alternatives. I don't know who the opposition stand for. I don't know what values they have. I don't know how they're going to lead the country moving forward. I'm not Syrian, by the way. But there's a big question mark about the strong defense that is being put by the majority of the panel for a group of people we know little about, other than they're being supported by Qatar and Saudi Arabia, the beacons of civilization and freedom. That's my concern.
What about the view that says, I'm just putting this to you, it's not my view, I'm just putting it to you. What about the view that says it almost doesn't matter who they are, they can't be worse than the Assad regime?
I'd like to hear the other point of view, and that's what I'm not getting. I mean, I'm resorting to listening.
Of course it matters.
Okay, Nadim, go.
Of course it matters. How do you say it doesn't matter, but only the change? I said in the beginning, I look at the opposition. I don't feel they represent me as a Syrian. I look at the regime. The corruption has eaten the country from inside. But I look at the third party, which are the people inside Syria. They want the change. So how do we come about and discuss the process of the change? I'm not saying we should not change. I'm not promoting any haphazard dialogue. What I'm promoting is, which has not happened in 40 years, I don't agree with that, is an international conference outside Syria. Look at the Ta'if conference. Ta'if Conference finished 22 years of civil war in Lebanon. It finished only when the Lebanese came together in the Ta'if and they found an equation that they all were happy about.
Good.
And now, what are we happy about as Syrians? We cannot answer the question unless we come all together and find these values that all the people of Syria aspire to. But the regime, neither the regime nor the opposition represent me as Syrian, because they are all the red line is the power. They want the power in any way and every way.
Paul Conroy wanted just to come in on this point.
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to apologise for the panel for being so rubbish. Look, the priority is, at this point in time, while we're all sitting here drinking water and doing all of that, whatever we all do, people are actually dying every day. People are getting slaughtered. They're not worried about who's going to seize power or who's going to rule the place. They're actually worried about this point in time is getting through the night, hoping the kids don't come home with a hole in the head. All of the stuff we've seen, we've smelt. It's happening now. I agree with this. I think this is a great thing to do. But if we sit here and say we automatically have to rule out any military intervention or arming just because it's ethically a bit wrong, I think that's a mistake, because it's actually what's happening in Syria now is ethically very wrong. And it's actually, we apologise. I wish I had an answer that I could say to you, oh, okay, we'll get a little group together, we'll go off to Geneva, have some coffee and we'll sort it. Till that happens, people are still dying, and that's, I'm really sorry I can't give you that answer. But at the moment, people are not worried about which sect or family, etc. They're worried about staying alive, and it's not just a few people who are worried. This is happening on such a scale that you should think about it a bit more. I'm sorry to attack, but that's the reality.
I want to make sure as much as possible that every question that's been asked does get an answer. So I want to put to you, Michael Weiss, this point about Russia. The question said, maybe if there's pressure on Russia, they will then in turn reduce their support for the Assad regime. Can you just give us a very focused answer on that?
Yeah, I take a very dim view that the solution for Damascus runs through Moscow, for reasons I sort of alluded to before. The Syrian political and military establishment got much of its training, if not ideological, then certainly its military training, its logistical training, in Russia. And by that I mean in Soviet Russia and in Putinist Russia. Hafiz al-Assad was trained as an Air Force pilot in the Russian Academy. The Mukhabarat learned everything they know from the Soviet Intelligence Directorate. Paul mentioned that the media center in Baba Amr was targeted. The way that the Syrian regime probably did that is they traced satellite phone calls coming from that center. That was a tactic that was perfected in the war in Chechnya. If you look at the way that Syria has been sort of running a scorched earth campaign, this is very similar to what Putin did in the late 90s and early 2000s in Chechnya. Grozny is sort of comparable to Baba Amr. My concern is Russia has not even alluded to wanting to see Bashar al-Assad step down, much less have a solution that you might describe as something other than Assadism without Assad. The maintenance of this sort of criminal dynasty in place and all of the sort of fretworks of a police state. I don't see it happening. I think, look, a lot of Syrians, they still travel to Moscow. They keep their money in Russian banks. Maher al-Assad's wife is rumored to be in Moscow at the moment. I think that the Russian solution to this would be essentially just optics, sort of cosmetic solution, and it's not going to stop the killing. This is the thing. The genie on this conflict is already out of the bottle. Let me just briefly go over some statistics to give you a sense of the level
briefly, because I do want to get a couple more questions. Really briefly.
The UN estimates that over 1 million people have been affected by this. That's including, of course, 10,000 who are dead, 230,000 internally displaced, tens of thousands more that have fled to neighboring countries such as Lebanon and Jordan. There are 18,000 Syrian refugees living in tents in Turkey. The Turkish Red Crescent estimates that by the end of this thing, or actually not even the end of this thing, they might have to absorb as many as 500,000. Now, this is an unsustainable state of affairs. It's the reason I think that some form of intervention is inevitable. I see what is unfolding now without any foreign assistance, except, of course, Iran, China, and Russia's assistance to the Assad regime, is a catastrophe, a humanitarian catastrophe that is bleeding in to other countries in the region. Fighters are coming in from Iraq, by the way. This is destabilizing not just to the Lebanese political system, but to the very tenuous Iraqi one that the United States has no control over. So I don't see this going away. You have to ask the rebels and civilians to suddenly, let's assume the most magical state of affairs. Bashar al-Assad announces tomorrow that he's pulled all troops from the city, from all the cities and restive zones, and he wants to actually initiate this program of dialogue or reform. Then you're going to ask people who have been made widows and orphans to trust a regime that has been killing, dispossessing, and raping them for the better part of a year. Are they going to lay down their guns and say, okay, we now accept that you're going to do the business you ought to have done a year ago? I don't think that's a realistic option. I think the fighting is going to continue, even if, miraculously, the regime decided it doesn't want any part of it.
Okay, we've got a few hands up. Let's pass that to whoever's there, then bring it forward here, and the last one will be up there.
I have a very quick question for Paul, as someone who's been there recently.
Does that mean you've been there recently? Or
no.
As he has been there?
As he's been there recently. I've heard various reports that only about 60%, or about 40% of the army is actually being used. And, I mean, percentages vary, but that a great majority is still in barracks with no access to television or mobile phone coverage. Is that true? And if so, are we waiting for Bashar to deploy this whole sector of the army that doesn't really know what's going on?
Okay, thank you. While we take the second question, if you can bring the microphone to the lady here, and we'll hear the one at the back. Yeah.
I have a question about, you've touched, I'm a bit, don't quite know, because you said, Roger, that there are talks in Istanbul and talks about possible money and arms, and then Nadim saying that they're not letting any material through, and it's logistically very hard to get stuff into Syria. And what role does Turkey play? Because they're a big player in the region. We're talking about intervention and NATO intervention, the big bogeyman. But what role is there for Ottoman occupier like Turkey, who share a long border, has an army, has the money and a vested interest? That's what I would like to know.
Thank you very much. And the last question is here. Did we bring the microphone over here? Oh, it's you. There was some confusion. In that case, I'm going to get both of you in. Go on, the lady in purple. You go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you very much. When solving a problem, does the panel not think that you have to look at the situation at this moment in time and then sort out the answer accordingly? I mean, at the moment, people are dying. Does Father Nadim really still think there's time for a dialogue?
I see. Thank you. And the last question is going to be here, if we can get the microphone rapidly to you.
Just want to pick up on what Michael Weiss mentioned when you said Russia, China and Iran, which I think we haven't heard earlier tonight. I mean, aren't we actually looking at an unfortunate situation where, as tragic as it is, this problem lies as much outside of Syria as it does inside it? Because we have Qatar and Saudi Arabia on one side, we have Iran somewhere else, and that also links into the question about Turkey and its policy of friendly relations with its neighbours. Aren't we actually dealing with a problem that actually lies outside in terms of the reluctance to intervention?
Okay, thank you very much for that. Thanks for all those questions. Apologies to people who I wasn't able to include.